Yeah, great. Hey, everyone. If I haven't said hello to you already. Thanks everyone for coming here to the data innovation and research subcommittee. Always get the three terms mixed up, but I'm Evan Bernosky. I'm Chief Stormwater Policy Advisor here at DEQ. And so, we have a pretty full agenda, I think, and Matt's going to go through the details, and we'll go back and recap with some of the progress we've made thus far. Also know that we have some people attending virtually, so hello to everybody. Couple quick things. So I've been the chair of this subcommittee coming on, I think, about a year and a half now. And I've been at DEQ about 2 years. But I'm actually leaving DEQ. I'm getting ready to leave the agency. As you all know, I was hired as confidential assistant to Director Rolban to manage a series of special projects. A few of them are coming to an end. Had the opportunity to stay on, but I have a good opportunity to go on and work and run a conservation investment firm. So I'm pretty excited about that. Hopefully I'll be able to speak with you guys in that position in the future. But that said, just to sort of demonstrate how much support DEQ has for the important work we're doing, you're going to be left in even better hands. So of course you guys know Dave Davis, who has been the vice chair from the beginning. But Alex Sams, who is DEQ deputy director, will actually be taking over for my role and chairing the subcommittee moving forward. So hi, Alex.
Hi, hi everyone.
Say a couple words.
I'm learning a lot. I did have a little bit of time dealing with some of this when I was with the Corps of Engineers from 2017 to 20, at least on the coastal storm risk management side of it. But super excited to fill the big shoes that Evan has left me and learn more about what you guys are doing.
Great. And yeah, just to point that out, Alex came to us from the Corps of Engineers, it's the Norfolk District Office.
Yes.
And so just brought an incredible wealth of experience to generally every program at DEQ, but I actually think specifically will be helpful and useful for the work we're all doing, especially as it pertains down in sort of the Hampton Roads and sort of Norfolk area, which, as we all know, is one of the areas we've been focusing on so much. So with that said, I think I'm going to kick it over to Matt, unless there's anything I'm forgetting. And I'm actually probably going to leave simply because my last day is Friday, and I've got a ton of stuff to do prior to then. So thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone.
You all see that just loading screen. Well, here, welcome. Thank you all. Here's the agenda. Quick overview. One business item to discuss. The statewide flood hazard data. Working on flood hazard areas. The new business on flood hazard analysis. Data information to our readers and stakeholders. And then start getting into our key recommendations. Additional member discussion, then we'll open it up to public comment, and work on the scheduling for our meeting, and then turn before 3 o'clock.
Matt, does that microphone work?
Yeah.
We'll be back. Can you get that?
Testing 1, 2. Is that better?
Yeah.
So with that, can we get a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, that passes. Next is the adoption of the Q4 meeting minutes. Any comments or discussion items following the meeting minutes from last subcommittee meeting? No, can I get a motion to pass the meeting minutes? Final minutes posted. Great, thank you. Second,
Second.
thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
You. All right, through the. Just a reminder, I will follow who subcommittee makeup is. We also have Karen McGladfrey online from UVA. Who else do we have online? Nora Rock or
Second, I'll get you that list.
Rebecca Murphy from Northern Virginia.
We have, Karen McGlathry, Rebecca Murphy, Kelso, are members online. And then we have 2 members of the public.
And just for clarification, Kelso Farrell from George Mason University is an invited guest. We've asked for him to participate. We've got Dr. Molly Mitchell here today, who is now an alternate to Dr. Mark Lukenbach. So thank you all for attending and providing input. So just a quick overview again of what we're trying to do with the subcommittee. Just at the high level, one, inform how we are looking at our flood hazard data and the modeling of that data, especially as we've expanded now to all major sources of flooding. Whereas before we were just looking at the coastal flood hazard, now we're working with fluvial flood hazard, seeking your input on what we can do for this plan and future plans. Then seeking your input on taking that data and looking at the risk assessment. So now that we have flooded, where are the risks based on different built natural human infrastructure, and then working on recommendations for our future plans. So beyond what we're doing in the first 2 items with phase 2, what should we be doing or could we be doing moving forward? And that's kind of in those 3 buckets of research, data, and innovation. And that research, data, and innovation is not specific just to the data we use in plan, but perhaps how we implement different practices or need new practices or different ideas to help us move this forward. I just wanted to reiterate that it is a broader scope here for that future recommendations. Here's an overall schedule of where we stand within the overall phase 2 plan due at the end of this calendar year. So now less than 12 months away, phase 2 delivered. Our first quarter of 2024. Subcommittee meeting preceding the TAC meeting in March. We're making progress on the flood hazard exposure model, getting prepared to start the risk assessment. We've been collecting projects to be able to analyze what actions are planned and underway or what the needs are, working with the funding subcommittee on our financial needs, and then continuing how we engage throughout this process, of which this is the primary engagement method is meeting with our TAC and subcommittee to get your all input on what we're doing with this plan. Just a breakdown of the schedule within the subcommittee. Today, phase 2, looking at our flood hazard data scenarios and then the combined flood hazards, starting on future plan recommendations, and then that will be a primary topic of discussion moving forward as we get to the Q2, Q3, and Q4 meetings. In the Q3 meeting, we also plan to discuss some of the updates of the flood hazard assessment. Any questions or comments on the overall plan of where we're at overall with the subcommittee? Okay. Got another slide in here. There's a lot of work to get done. We can't do it all within these hours. So we have support. Great. We have Dewberry under our existing contract. They delivered phase 1 and have been helping us get started with phase 2. They're working on the fluvial modeling effort in the coastal zone. They're going to be taking those results and our coastal results and the available fluvial data from FEMA to work on a combined flood hazard, looking at the impacts. So that work's already under scope and underway. Then we also have new resilience planning and consulting contractors that we're currently working on getting on board. Currently in negotiations with a few different contractors and some of the different work efforts that come out of that. For this effort is the actual plan design, development, and production of the plan itself, an update to our coastal resilience web explorer, facilitating, helping us with our outreach and engagement, looking at the plan resilience actions, all those projects. I think there's over 600 now projects and initiatives in the database, trying to understand where the gaps are, how we can close those gaps, and also help us provide more financial information and tools to work towards it. So that's just an overview of where we're at. For old business items, the first item I wanted to start with is the Virginia Flood Protection Master Plan, or the statewide flood resilience plan and flood hazard data, and then we'll get into some of the flood hazard data and scenario plan. So first up on the flood protection master plan, at previous subcommittee meetings, we've discussed the data gaps that exist across the state, especially as we look at fluvial flooding, which FEMA does cover, but it tends to be out of date, limits of study. There's approximate floodplains, unmapped floodplains. But a bigger gap beyond that is that the fluvial data just does not exist within FEMA's data. And so we see this as a challenge as we go to look statewide to really have a comprehensive and consistent view of flood hazard risk across the Commonwealth to make informed decisions at the state level. So what are we looking at? So we are considering some available data options from third-party vendors. But right now, we're looking at some of their data products at two evaluation sites, test sites, one in Dahlgren, which is in the coastal plan. So we do have our coastal resilience master plan, coastal data. We have our fluvial pilot study data there. We have the FEMA data, and now we have this third-party vendors data to look at. So that's comparing their data products against where we have good data and updated data. And then we're also looking at a site in Farm, which is outside of our coastal resilience master plan. We don't have any of our newer data. The only data we have in that location is primarily the FEMA. So comparing what this vendor can provide versus what FEMA has met to see if this data is suitable for use in the statewide planning effort. We pulled together a data evaluation team, multiple stakeholders from universities, PTCs, different state agencies to provide it. If you all are interested in looking at this and helping provide input, we're currently doing that effort. We have a 45-day window to look at this data and hoping to get final recommendations out of that group by the end of February, early March, so that we could discuss it and present it at the next TAC meeting potentially. So this process is underway. I'm not going to get into too many of the details of it, but if you're interested in looking at this different type of information, please let us know. Do want to acknowledge some of the concerns regarding data liability and using third-party data. We are looking into that. We have a meeting scheduled with NOAA to talk about their concerns and how the federal government is doing the use of third-party data, so that we can be more informed if we, in our kind of decision making, should the state consider using this for planning purposes. Any questions or comments on statewide plan and the data evaluation that we're doing first?
So I guess I was just curious, so the third party plan is still just 100-year floodplain, or is it a different way of presenting it?
No, it's much different. So they have multi-frequency data, like at the lower 2-year or 5-year up to the 1,000-year event. And then they have forward-looking projections. Their standard out-of-the-box products are tied to SSPs instead of the RCPs. You could get RCPs That's an option, but we're looking at kind of off the shelf, what's ready to be used, giving our schedule constraints for the statewide plan. We have limited time to develop our own data. Also, budgets were a concern when we were looking at what do we use, because the time to do baseline engineering across the state with our time frame and budget just wasn't feasible. So they had fluvial, coastal data, current conditions and future conditions out to community.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right,
Matt, I have a question.
yes,
Do we know for the university researchers, do any of you using this third party data?
No. It's not being used to a certain extent because it's behind a paywall is part of the reason it's not used. But there's also, they are not very open about how they derive their final results. And so that was maybe academic.
A little shy.
Yeah, and my understanding is that there are evaluation efforts by certain academic more climatological institutes that we have here groups that are taking a look at some of these issues. But there have been some raised eyebrows at some of the results in some of the third party products.
No, I'm not aware of research from the tech.
product we're looking at. It's been used in other state plans. Texas has used the data, Florida's now using the data. And I think what Texas did was brought in university to provide some third party check. Some of those questions.
And as we're looking at third party data is either having one or more of the university researchers part of that evaluation team or some sort of QA/QC.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got Kelso is on the data evaluation team for George Mason University. And then we've got Derek Wall.
Okay.
All right, moving on to Coastal Resilience Master Plan Phase 2. This is a continuation of a discussion that we had at our last subcommittee meeting about reframing how we're looking at future conditions and the scenario planning with our Coastal Resilience Master Plan Phase 1. We had the coastal flood hazard data. We used a single projection and looked at it every 20 years. It's helpful for the curve, a linear line. When we started looking at the other data sets, when we go to all major sources of flooding, the pluvial flood hazard data doesn't line up with our coastal hazard data. We'll see that in the next slide. Then we're trying to rethink how we look at this information for different scenarios to consider for planning. So the first item I wanted to focus on is kind of terminology that we're using. In our previous meeting, I think I had upper bounds and lower bounds, likely and probable. And we received your feedback that using statistical language is just not going to be helpful. It's going to be more confusing. And we also spoke to the people that did Marissa work that we're using for our forward-looking rainfall projections. And they had a recommendation to use more risk tolerance terminology to have your kind of option A and option B within these two different timelines. With those being a risk tolerance, where you have a low risk tolerance, so you don't have a lot of flexibility, adaptive capacity. If if an event happens, higher risk, so you have lower tolerance. Those would be, where you want to use more conservative numbers, where the flooding projections are a little higher to give yourself a factor of safety. The other kind of baseline we were looking at, was moderate, which could be kind of equivalent to a minimum planning standard. We didn't want to go to a low, because we don't really want people planning to that level, so kind of the moderate is the baseline, and then an upper band, an upper option, more conservative option, lower risk tolerance. On this slide, wanted to talk about those terminology, and whether you all have any thoughts or input on what's being used right now related to the risk tolerance, the moderate and a low for this. Any thoughts? And this, I mean, switching words around, we can get to if we want to wordsmith. But as far as conceptually, having kind of a moderate value, which could align with more of the median, the distribution, and then a higher bound, which could either be in a different climate change projection or the different confidence interval, maybe 75 or 90% confidence interval, to show that variability exists, and uncertainty exists in the future that we're planning. And that depending on your use case, whoever's using this product, here's some options you could and you would say should consider when you look for.
Yeah, I like that wording. I think it's more easily interpretable than sort of like the old thing, likely, very likely, you know, kind of wording. And then puts it back on the question of not so much what's most likely to happen, but how willing we are to risk.
I think we could support that type of language, almost stories for use cases that are more related. And maybe not even related to flooding, but other types of risks people face in their daily life and how they approach those risks to try to make it transferable.
Yeah.
All right. So next is wanted to talk about it. We're still in this kind of planning scenario, the time horizon that we're looking at. So both where we are setting the start point and an end point of the time horizon, just pick somewhere in the middle. And then the terminology, near future, far future, could be short term, could be long term. Don't want to get into too much of the word, but it's conceptually ranges or single value in the middle, pros and cons, or in the word. And this shows the data that we have and where it exists within this plan. So we have a 20-year time interval for our coastal flood hazard data using this 2017 intermediate high data. On the fluvial side, we have Atlas 14 for our current data, and then we have two different climate scenarios, RCP 4.5 and 8.5, at two different timing horizons from the Marissa data, which uses 2020, 2070, 2050 to 21. And then the fluvial side, we are good at it. Not trying to match anything, but so trying to kind of mix what's going on in the fluvial side, still making it relatable to people in planning and their planning horizons. Maybe a mortgage, 30-year mortgage, that's relatable. From the business community, they're on a much shorter time frame, 5 years, what they're concerned about. When you're building larger infrastructure, you need larger time. So we're trying to meet the needs of our varied stakeholders and use cases, but still make it digestible. Any thoughts? If we use the range, can we adjust the ranges?
My only thought about the far future one, because it's a very wide range, right?
Yeah.
Is that works really well with fluvial sea level rise is accelerating very, very quickly by that point, you know? And so you're gonna get really, so I guess I was just curious how you envision, what number are you
That's what's coming up
envisioning for
next.
that? Okay.
That's where we follow,
So is there gonna be any, differences in that time frame, that 2050 to 2060, where there's overlap, like? Is it gonna say different? Different results, which could be confusing, trust me, I'm brand new to this, don't know a whole lot, so. Could be a dumb question too,
no, I think that's valid, right? We're showing it overall,
right?
and then we kind of pulled from what they didn't include. But yes, if you show that, does that make it confusing if you're saying, well, I'm
Is it-
planning for 2050,
Right,
which one do I use? Now you're giving four, that's too many. Should there be a clean break between near future and far future? Sounds,
That-
yeah.
that's what I was
think
saying.
first- Yeah,
Probably more intuitive. There.
From a business owner perspective, that's what I was saying, like, all right, my business is gonna be done by 2050, here's what which one do I pick, you know?
yeah. We're also showing the uncertainty, like here at the upper end. You're like, oh, I'm only saying for 10, 20. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's hard to get, well, to show all that uncertainty. It's great.
And it's really, really challenging to try to serve multiple decision makers with the same product. If you're the mortgage industry, you're worried about that 30 years. But if you're the locality, you know that if that house goes in, it's physically going to be there for another 100 years. Or that highway that DOT is gonna be putting in, they're responsible for upgrading, you know, in 50 years. So they're also looking at the time scale to try to do all of these things with the same product. So I think it's just, how do you make it as flexible as possible?
Yes. Without making it confusing, right?
Correct.
Flexibility,
What's the balance?
yes, that's what, I mean, that's ultimately what we're trying to find, a good balance point. I guess tying this back to who are our key stakeholders, who's this plan meant for? Primarily, these localities who have a lot of the burden in implementing these larger scale projects, as well as state agencies that are also doing work in this space. And so business owners are an important stakeholder, but we know they've got a very wide range of use cases and ways of looking at it. And I think that's something, if we can't directly deal with that, you know, the plans presented, there's also more outreach that can be done to business community. Say, here's what we've got, here's how we think you want to use this, here's how we direct based on what we've had.
Yeah, so I really like splitting it into, because I think that's right, that there are these, you know, different stakeholders, maybe with different needs. I like splitting it into kind of like short-term planning, moderate term, or future planning. So I think the point about the overlap is maybe a good, that's confusing. Or if we end up with conflicting sort of numbers, it's fine.
Yeah, well, let's get into the data. So because some of this question, this is the data we have to choose from. And so if we said 2050, we've got limited options on the coastal side of what we can then use to that. So let's take a look at the data and maybe we'll come back to how that. So this is the blank slate we kind of have and are working to fill in the blanks. What available data of the available data sets and information? Where does each one go in near future, very near future, and far future? So we've got that question for all three different flood hazards. We're gonna start with coastal flood first. And for, I guess, before we get there, the existing conditions, we plan on using 2020 coastal resilience master plan coastal. The Atlas 14 fluvial, we know it's a little more historic than current. And then the fluvial again, FEMA is what we got. So I don't know that we have So that's what we're on the existing side. Yes, after this,
After this, okay, yeah.
the exact date, so Atlas 14, the new volume coming out next year, then a year later, Atlas 15.
Atlas, you know,
Yeah.
okay.
So it's coming. We're just after.
After, yeah.
Sorry, I missed this. Karen had or she had a comment. I agree that it's not clear why there is the overlap between near and far future, suggests not having overlap and start far future 2070. And also 2050 is not really far future. Sorry, it's a couple minutes ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. 30 years away. Less than 5, closer to 25 years. Yeah, I think we can work on adjusting where that split is, and then maybe adjusting the terminology to also kind of meet what data presented. So on the coastal side, as far as guidance, what's going on, just wanted to pull up 2 different guiding documents that are out there as far as for forward-looking planning and design. American Society of Civil Engineers, ASCE, has this new flood supplement that they put out relatively recently. And their kind of minimum standards, so the minimum rate of sea level rise that you should include in your forward-looking designs for structures, primarily, they're saying at least use the linear trend as the bare minimum, just use the linear observed trend. So that's one kind of base minimum that's out there. Designing standard, can be different than planning, but put out there. And we also have our Virginia State Floodplain Management Standards. So these still are in draft form, and this is from the draft standards that were released in December of last year. But on these standards, we're using the NOAA 2022 intermediate high projections for state-owned development in the floodplain and in future areas of sea level. Those are just 2 different baseline or information points for reference. So we've got the sea level rise report card. Got Molly here, so if I mess anything up, 2 reasons that I wanted to talk about this data. One is we do have that linear data that we were talking about within the graph and then in the table, just what sea level rise projections look like over time. I projected it out beyond 2050 to 2075, just to keep that in and kind of get us into our longer term plan horizon. The other thing I wanted to show, and this is something that I think is important, is the graph and the amount of variability, observed variability that exists in water surface levels that we are observing. So this isn't some projection that we think it's going to bounce around with. Over time, we know there are interannual, monthly, and decadal variations in sea level. And if you hit a spike and are up on that dotted line on the top, which is too high, if that was the mean, you've just like moved 15, maybe 20 years into the future. And if that's happening over a month or longer and you're getting flooding, I mean, that's something that's impactful. That sea level rise is this consistent pattern that over time, yes, we're projecting these increases, but as time goes on, we could spike and be well above that projection line or even under. But when you're above it, you advance the curve and advance our plans. So that's some of the uncertainty we're trying to capture within our moderate and low risk columns, because that water could be up there, we could have an event, and if your structure asset is impacted, are you planning for the recurrence? Those were my main points here. Looking at in 2050, another foot levels in 2000. There's still a lot of rise. This figure is from our phase 1 effort in the coastal resilience map. So this takes NOAA's 2017 sea level rise projection, and this is their gridded product that gives spatial variability to sea level rise over our project. And you can see in the near term, 2040 projections, the change across our project space 0.2 of a foot. But long term, there's a greater variability, well over half a foot between primarily what's going on down at the mouth of the bay versus up further. So we do have this variability built into the data of our phase 1 effort. And this again uses our used NOAA's 27 intermediate high projection. But NOAA has new data, and that new data from 2022 is what we're referencing in our state floodplain management standards. So what is that? Hard to see any figure. So I tried to pull it out the graph. This is only for one location, Sewell's Point. So we have our phase 1 data on the right. Then we have the different curves from the 22 projections on the left. So we've got a low, intermediate, high, and then a high value. And then again, just highlighting what the state is currently using in the draft floodplain management. So if we're looking at our near term, which I think we get 2030 to 2060. So if we look at 2040, if we were trying to pick a low and a moderate risk value in that time frame, we try to match 2040 to 1 foot, but we already exceeded with our lowest value. So this is kind of our lowest option we can go with. And then what do we pick for the upper end? The lower risk tolerance. Do we go to 2060? It kind of looks closer to what the new projections are at 2080. So this is kind of the mixing and matching. And then longer term it's a little easier because the spread is wider and we kind of can match up. So 2060 of our data match closer to the 2080 updated data, and then our 2070-80. So we're kind of 20 years old. So what do we do? How do we pick data points? These are the 4 we had to meet some planning information. So
Say just a word about the 2022 projections. They are newer, but much of the water processing community doesn't consider them better. And the reason is that what NOAA did essentially was push back the rate of acceleration. But all of the data coming out right now about the Greenland ice sheet melting is that it's moving faster than we expected, which would actually speed up the acceleration rate. And so I think if you want to look at it from a risk tolerance perspective, going to the 2022 makes you more tolerant of risk than sticking with the 27. I mean, it's hard to say which one's going to be right. They're not radically different, right? And in 2080, right, there'll be variability, but I think that's where it's
so acknowledge that we're using the 22 projections in the state standard and the curve. Okay. Trying to have some consistency, even though we're going to be inconsistent, but we're using some of this older data, trying to fit it into our plans. And that we want, like, when we put the plan out, focusing on the messaging of it and the low risk and the moderate risk. This will be disclosed, what options we choose, and we will still do outreach, but mainly to practitioners. And that's not something we want to confuse the public with. And try to create a lot of trust in what we're doing.
right. Well, and maybe the thing is that, so the endpoints are not really that different. It's the rate at which you reach those endpoints in between the two projections. So maybe that's part of the messaging is that, you know, it's happening between the.
Yeah.
time.
And that's where the planning horizon
Yeah.
comes. Instead of saying at 2060, it's gonna be.
Yeah.
Between this time frame, here's the moderate risk value we recommend. And here's a high risk. And this is, again, for planning to make more informed decisions. This isn't use that for design.
Right.
This is, how do we understand what the uncertainties are to make more informed decisions? That can inform where we maybe build or don't build something, and then if it is built, those design standards are not coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I see this, at least when I think master plan, I think iterative. So as NOAA data goes up and down, you know, the master plan that gets updated every 5 years, I think it is,
Yes,
gets updated also, and it adjusts wherever the science takes it.
that is true too.
So,
This is kind of fine. We wouldn't at least make this work for the next 5 years. Does this give us enough information to have informed decision making to really try to consider those two different risk tolerances and those two different.
The only thing I would say here, like setting a moderate risk bound at the lower end of the spectrum. I think it's important to put the projections in the context of like the observational projections that incorporate acceleration, which you get from BIM CLRI's report card. You also get the 2022 scenario. So that's what we have been doing in our most recent like round of studies with Port News, Naval Station Norfolk, and Oyster, we're doing it elsewhere. But we're trying to use the verbiage of minimally viable planning curve. So if you look at the acceleration indicate, and you can see, and this is just the plot from the NASA area with the 22 scenarios, and I use BIMs all the time. I try to go first,
Thank you.
But, like the observational extrapolation is 1.54 feet, which is the same as the intermediate curve on the 2022 projection. So the VIMS for immediate projection is just below that. So maybe that intermediate curve should be your lower bound that you should absolutely plan for. And then you look at that VIMS Q high, and it's 2 feet. That's above the high curve on the 2022 scenario. So I would just suggest like we have what we didn't have like 10 years ago or whatever, when in this practice is that kind of projection to help use as a justification for selecting certain areas. And I think it's important.
I appreciate that. And hopefully extending those studies to 22, that even the numbers we have, we are kind of putting that first and working it in with us. And what we're working on. The messaging, trying to capture that, but then providing the other concepts.
You can always use approximates language too, if it's close, within a couple of tenths.
Yeah.
Somewhere, I think that's someplace.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And you know, as you say that, Brian, one of the things about the choice for Virginia to adapt the intermediate high was actually a more conservative approach anyway. So there is some cushion built in there for bad things to happen, basically, by taking that over the intermediate. On the 20, yeah, that's true, on the 2020.
So if we had to, okay, here's what I'm throwing up on the wall to start. We need something in the near future. With what we have is, unless we wanted to use the 2020 data again as moderate, it seems kind of risky, especially for near term, if it goes out to 60, even if it's 2050. That's just saying no additional change. Then we're not even meeting the linear. Right. So do we, of the options available, 2040 seems like a good option for the moderate. Then on the low side, the next number we have to use is the 2060. Unless you wanted to go out to 2080, but then you're.
So is that getting to, something about the messaging question, because then you have the same scenario for your moderate, long, far future here,
Yes,
right? Is that gonna be a messaging?
I think, I mean,
I'm just
actually,
figure out the logic behind it.
the logic is, you have low risk, you're gonna use this number. But if you can accept some more risk in the long term, based on where the numbers are, we still think this is what number we should be looking at. So it still gives us a lower bound. Then on the low range for the far future, that was kind of looking back at their long-term projections. We use 6.8, it's higher than, it's close to the high. Good, I mean, that's at the end of the time period. So that is a worst case, say, scenario, that could be too aggressive. If they're trying to find some happy medium, we'll add into the
You're looking at the 4.8
4 point
is for that high risk.
would be the long-term, far future, low risk option. Versus 2 more feet. It's pretty substantial.
Well, is it helpful to try to role play ourselves in the situation as who are theoretical? So if you are planning to, you are working for VDOT, for Virginia Beach, and you're an engineer, and you need to make a decision about engineering, how you're going to design and engineer a particular stormwater culvert. What's your timeline gonna be for that? Is it 50 years from now, or is it 70 years from now? And how does that consider low or high risk tolerance, or are they building in an additional safety factor on top of that for things like wave action on top of it, right? So thinking that out versus if you are trying to make a decision, you work for local government, you are trying to make a decision about whether or not to allow rezoning a parcel for residential development. That's a very different system. So how does that then work through for that theoretical decision maker? Or if you are working with the school system and trying to cite a new school, how does that work? And if we put ourselves in those theoretical spaces, is it helpful to then walk through the low and the moderate the way that you laid it out?
It is. That spread, we use 3.1, 6.8, 3.7 feet. Is that going to cause decision paralysis? Where it's too wide ranging, they don't know, we're just not leaving ourselves with any.
Yeah, I mean, is there a way to, and I'm thinking this is more in the explanatory side of it, to say, these are planning horizons, so you put the 4.8 out there. But say that there is, a reasonable possibility that it could be as high
It could.
as 6.8 in that time frame. And so then, so we're talking, this is low risk tolerance, but if you really had 0 risk tolerance, right?
Mhm.
You would want to plan for a higher,
Yeah.
and there's not a lot of stuff that's 0 risk tolerance, but maybe like a hospital siting or a school siting, like you were saying, you might want to be like, yeah.
Yeah, and I think we need to be clear too that these aren't.
Yeah,
These are just helping us make decisions in the next 5 years for our longer term. If you are doing a design, yes, and that's asset will be there. Then you need to look at that. And work with whoever your client is, whoever the owner is. To know, like, if this event happens, is that acceptable? Or not? Do we need to design? Can we adapt? Or not? Nuclear facility, right? 5,000 years.
Yeah.
If that is, but yes, over the next 5 years, how did these locality decision makers, decision makers, cities, could make more? That gets us moving towards the right direction. Being the uncertainty, I just don't, if we keep piling on like another layer of it, it's just another thing to try to explain. And
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always this balance between if we plan for any of that, we genuinely plan for any of that, we'll be more resilient than we are today.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, a huge win. And then I guess the question is just like, to what extent are we worried about 30 years from now being like, it's like, pick a higher number. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think your rationale for this makes sense, but I just think maybe in the best makes it, make it clear that this is not a.
this is
zero
not
risk.
exact.
It's not a zero risk kind of,
No.
yeah.
There's still uncertainty.
Also too, messaging it in a way that helps the decision makers see the end use of this. Because we've got a lot on the physical science that we're providing. We don't necessarily have a whole lot of social sciences. What is this universe of decisions that we're hoping that people will make with this plan? We've got projects that we know of, but there are projects out there that we don't know of. And some of that is tied to who are the decision makers and what is that space. But you need to create something that helps them find themselves in this, and your responsibility is to, as DCR, help walk them through to see where their decision is. It's not necessarily for you to be the one giving the exact information to say, okay, DWR would, use this risk tolerance to decide if you should purchase this piece of property or this piece of property. I think what you need to do is make sure that the messaging is creating the space. That we meet them where they are, because this is.
Planning guidelines and information,
Yeah.
educational research. Right? We need to be doing outreach and sharing with how this fits into their decisions. Because by and large, it's others that are making decisions. It is not DCR that's making decisions. And so trying to incorporate it into the thought process so that they understand how to use it and what it means. So that's, yes, making more informed and effective.
Matt, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Something Molly said earlier, just struck me. Could you go back to the previous slide?
Yep.
Yeah, so whatever data set you're using, that's assuming a static rate, right?
Accelerating, it is an accelerating.
It is an accelerating rate. Okay.
Yes.
That should be a little more obvious, because I didn't catch that.
Yeah, it's an accelerating rate, it's assuming a single trajectory. Right, so like one of these planning curves is assuming that we stay on that one planning curve. But the planning curve itself does assume that change accelerates over time.
It's still hard to see.
It's hard to say.
But I think it's helpful to flip back and look at, what has historically been realistic data, because that is where you can see it overall follows an accelerating trajectory, but you still have natural variability that does not go away. So you have years where there's going to be, higher than average sea levels with, changes in Gulf Stream speed or something like that. And then you have years where it's gonna be lower. Or you have years where you're suddenly going to have what just happened up in the Northeast and you ram a nor'easter through with another fourth or third on top of that. So none of that variability is going away. And how do we make sure that in whatever guidance we're providing, we're also making sure that people are clear on that too. This isn't a forecast that this will forever be the norm, the upper. This is the overall trajectory that you're still going to get that variation around.
Yeah, I just think you have, and I think that you need a disclaimer with whatever data you do choose to put out that explains exactly that, in some capacity.
Biggest question below our future. 2080 or 2000? And the reason we're trying to make a decision is that we need to figure out what data to use, that the impacts analysis and for visualization. So that's how these decisions impact how we start kind of next steps, combining data and doing the.
And I think if you're gonna do a window like this, even if it's not 2050 to 2100, even if it's like 2070 to 2100. The 2080 makes more sense than the 2100 number, because that would only happen at the end.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So I'm coming down on the side of yes.
Yeah, the one user group that I can think of that would probably be most interested in the 2100 number would be transportation planning. Because that is potentially critical infrastructure, electrical, water, sewer in particular. Because that is, by the time this plan gets completed by the end of the year, people are functionally using it in 2025, which means 2100 is only 75 years from now. And that is the extremely long-lived infrastructure where you make that decision to cite something now, you are stuck with that in next perpetuity. And stuck with defending that in the end period. So I think that would be the only end user group that would probably be interested in that 2100 number. The question is it okay in this context, because you got to run data, and running data costs money to leave that out.
Yeah, I think the good thing is we've already done the 2100. We have the 2100 data. And we've been talking with the transportation group about their resilience plan and their efforts and how they're analyzing their risks versus what we're working with in plan, because they're going above and beyond. And so I think we can still help support their use case, but our plan might not be as direct. But knowing that they're already doing work inside, supply that they have that flood exposure data, and they know their risk better. Working on the routing analysis, some of that they're doing with dams, and then knowing conditions and other criteria be necessary that they can try to.
Yeah, it feels like this is more for general case use, where transportation and military, they're already doing their own models and their own analysis that is probably at a higher degree of accuracy than what we can afford to do with this plan. At least that would be my assumption. I know the military is doing that with Langley.
Right. Good. Another hour. The next moving on. More variability, more options. So here's some rest of the data. Again, we've got Alice 14, two different RCP scenarios, 4.5, 8.5, two different time frames, 2020, 27. kind of see the spread. This is mainly for the duration, more uncertainty with the duration of the storm, but there's more uncertainty also as you go up in time. So trying to think about, well, what fluvial data are we using as a reference point? Just a reminder, the way we are doing the fluvial modeling right now is sort of a fixed interval approach for precipitation. At the 2-hour storm, it's a 1/2 inch step. Of the 6-hour and 24, well. Yeah, which one is it? But that's a 1 inch that we have. So those are the data points we're going to be kind of pulling from. So just think about that as we. So I pulled out a couple different individual sites. We'll look at what does the data actually look like. If we're going to start choosing, should we use an RCP 8.5 and an RCP 4.5 for a median value, which is in the blue. Then I also put the 75th percentile and the 90th percentile. So here, Ashland, Virginia, and our coastal region, 112-hour duration. The main takeaway that I'm getting from the data that it's showing is RCP 8.5 or 4.5 aren't that different in the projections. This is the long term, going on it's got the near future farm. They're still pretty close and a wider spread. But with the way we have the fluvial modeling set up at a 1 inch time step for the 12-hour, we're more than likely ending up on the same interval, or that can happen. Where depending on where this 4.5 is, that may get rounded up to 9 and the 8.5 is at 9. And that is the same exact there. So start looking at this. I don't know if we choose RCP 4.5. Maybe we choose a median value for our moderate risk. And then it's, well, we use 75 percentile for the low risk. And then whether we use the RCP 4.5 or 8.5, not that much difference, but there are some opinions, especially with how aggressive 8.5 is. So is it, would decision makers be more amenable to 4.5? And knowing we haven't gone too conservative. So just another site, similar results, right? RCP 4.5, 8.5, pretty close in the spread for the same confidence interval. But then you have more of the spread when you get between the median 75th or up to the 90%. So this is what I drew on the wall. 4.5 might be more amenable to the larger group of stakeholders that we have across the whole region. Using the median values, we should go really low median. But then on that low risk tolerance, do we go 75 percentile or 90? I'm just trying to keep people happy to start with 75th. We could go. Again, you just have a bigger range that people then have are looking at different impacts. Can people make that decision? Or...
I guess I'm curious how you see this being used. I mean, if we're talking, I mean, obviously to get a fun science answer, great. But if you're to see it being thought of in terms of, you know, the amount of water that lakes or dams or stuff or that kind of thing. All right. Never say that. I'm just thinking that might be an argument for going for that negative. At a low risk kind of or because in some cases it looked like that was quite a bit higher.
Yeah.
The 90%.
Doubling, but it's a significant increase. And again, this is for
This bag analysis of how much the difference was overall, or did it? anything more systematic. than Pulling a conversation.
You mean comparing between.
Yeah. But I think it is worth mentioning that, you know, this national climate assessment, the number of studies which rely solely upon five is a challenge in writing the assessment because, you know, I think the consensus is that we're not globally on emissions tracking as high as 8.5. And so anytime any of the chapters cited a study that was based on 8.5 alone, National Academies kicked it back and said, only report this if you have a range because of loss of confidence in 8.5. But we don't have, you know, a scenario in the middle to go with in this case. But, you know, how much does it matter and where?
I mean, I think Matt's point that you're always rounding up just because the error in the way it's being recorded kind of makes it the same, the 4.5 and the 8.5. And when you look at like the graphs of them, which you had one up earlier, but like the, you know, the error bars overlap pretty dramatically. Like there's very little differentiation actually between the two. And of course, this excludes like hurricanes, that kind of thing. So this is, you know, ordinary rain events. So yeah.
So another just point to think about is that we will have the depth grid products for all these rainfall events. Data will be hosted. That'll be available for people if we're not where they want it to be. But as far as reporting out in the plan and working towards impacts and having a number to say moderate, I think medium, but then when we go to low risk, yeah, how low do we want to go? 75?
I mean, Ashland is not that different, but was it Crozet was the other one?
Yeah, Crozet was one where it was,
Yes.
honestly, if going to statewide and thinking about some of the variation of the mountains would give me the most concern about the look at pull a couple and make sure that this really does hold.
Crozet is in Goochland County, I believe. Crozier. It's near.
Yeah, this is Crozier, you're right.
Crozier.
Crozier, yeah.
This is in Goochland.
Yeah, not a good one.
Yeah. And the county with the highest adjustment factor is Cubana County, across the entire state, not just. So this is representative of that region of where we experience the biggest projected change.
Okay, so this is basically this one, so most of them look more like
This
the
is
other ones, where there's
this is the top end.
not that big of a.
This is
difference
where,
between
right,
the
we might be two intervals.
It's just always a variation.
Yes.
It's got serious terrain that you have to worry about.
Is there any other, would you want sites? There are other kind of uncertainties that you have now that you'd like to move more on. But I think 4.5 is the good number. We're going the median, I think for the moderate, it's this low. That range. If you want to see more, see what the ranges are across our project area. And the data is just the data itself. So we can pull through it, try to get that back to you.
It might be good to look at. And just consider, I think.
Be able to, if it's all in an Excel table, it should be pretty easy to pull, you know, which station has the largest variation on the 90th percentile, which means 4.5 and 8.5. Because that would tell us, and how many stations have a substantial difference, you know, greater than 0.5 that would be rounded out. I think that would give us a little bit of guidance on that low. But I think it also gets back to, again, what's the decision and what counts as low tolerance for one versus low tolerance.
So Matt, let me just put this out here for the group to consider. We have a data expertise team, right? That you mentioned, Celso and Derek and some others. Should we put some of these questions to that team to discuss as well and get their feedback?
We can, I mean, if you all, as a subcommittee, want to get additional input or think we need to get additional input, solicit that. We have also on the line. We haven't asked this question of anybody else. You all are being asked.
Unfortunately, I can be at the Marissa meeting, but did you guys talk about this at all? Like how they would recommend it in the beginning?
We talked about what different states have done it.
Okay.
So they did talk, some states have just said median values RCP, different, we're gonna look at the different RCPs. And then other states have done, we're gonna pick an RCP and do median versus. So there is no standard that people are looking at both options. I think New Jersey had done it one way, somebody else. But they didn't feel strongly one way or the other.
Okay.
While you're trying to capture some of the uncertainty was what I'm trying to tie that.
Personally, I'd love to hear feedback from the data team.
Okay.
I don't know how y'all feel about
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think also in particular,
Yeah, I would think that as well.
this isn't his expertise, I think.
All right, well, let's table this one for now. And get more input. And could be a potential item for tax. So,
At this point, we're really, the question is that whether it's the 75th percentile or the 90th. Is that what we're thinking? The other
I
way?
think so. I mean, it sounds like 8.5 is not a good path.
Well, the concept like makes us different.
No,
Yeah.
not worth it, but so that's 75th. I think that is. So this is what it could look like, and this is again trying to just fill in the blanks. On the fluvial side, we talked about it internally. You had a stage of flooding, 2 feet of flooding. We don't have that data everywhere to be able to do this. It's not in our current contract with Newbury right now. Fluvial still making is a challenge. Because if 2 feet could be a lot in a very wide. And as we're out in the coastal region, we're pretty flat and low, and so that's could exceed well beyond a reasonable projection could be as far as relative to the other fluvial coast. So that's gonna, this data may or may not be available. Maybe from the feds coming, their timing, so it's unknown.
And the fluvial is, so the +1, is that having to do with the, like, fluvial flow, what's the thing? From the mountains, that would be working with the fluvial input.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions for the next section, which is new business? Good discussions. We've got 2:20, so good on time. Combined flood hazard analysis and visualization. So what do we have? Combined flooding, not compact. but combined as far as looking at in this location, what types of flooding could exist. So that people, we're not just looking only at coastal flooding, but in this location, you could experience fluvial and coastal certifications. Multiple exposure. Compound flooding not included in this phase, but still it's on the to-do list. Nice little figure, so First Street Foundation. Just trying to communicate the different ways in which water is showing up where land is normally dry. It's coming from our open water conveyance into the sky and accumulating before we get. So how do we take those different mechanisms, flooding kind of occurs and shows up on? How do we put that all together? So people are, when they're looking at what is my flood hazard, all of the sources. How does that work together? Phase one, and we just did the coastal side, but we did in the viewer at least put up the FEMA data. If you zoom in close enough, and if you wait long enough for the FEMA services to come through, they will show up. Which helps you, like here in Fredericksburg, I would say, looking at this, fluvial flooding is the dominant flood. Because the current condition is the wider flood for the same events, right? For 100 years and 500 years. Whereas we're showing that 2080 projections for coastal, we're still not on that side of the road. So how do we work to convey that information in our viewer and in our so these are just some of the ideas about how we're anticipating for taking the data we have, trying to do it. So one is kind of what first beyond what's there, what data is available? Because if the data is available or is not available, we need to know that because that doesn't say that flood hazard does not exist there, right? Just because FEMA didn't have it or we don't have it doesn't mean it doesn't. So first, we're thinking, well, what do we have as far as what data? So what flood hazards are available? The frequency of return interval. A lot of the FEMA data is 1% 100 year everywhere, 500 year most of the places, and then getting to the 5, 10, 25, 50 limited emissions. So just trying to help communicate to our stakeholders what's even available, what's included, and if they don't have some component of fluvial data, well, that has downstream impacts as far as what we can report. So that's one, is what's available. Two is showing what of the data we do have, trying to let them know what types, whether it's fluvial or coastal. We're trying to have that set up for the 5 different planning scenarios, kind of an extent raster for your near term and long term. Option A or B, low risk, moderate risk. Try to convey what are the sources of flooding that you should consider in your planning efforts. And then lastly, of those where we have the data and you've got multiple flood hazard, what is the dominant flood hazard or what flood hazard is occurring most frequently for a specific area? Again, so these are the 3 main products we're planning on developing with the help of Dewberry for these. Any thoughts? Missing something, guys?
So, for like the combined flood hazard, I guess that's kind of this one. So are you thinking, Brian, it's like 5 rafters or 3 rafters, 1 for each flood hazard type, or?
We gotta figure out that.
Okay.
Yes.
And so some of our team think there's possible to do a multi-cam raster that we could have certain things on, but well, we're gonna work through the whole presentation. So
Okay.
it's probably a little TBD, I would say, it's the best answer right now, but you wanna make it simple, interpretable, to follow, so. Maybe multi-band, not the best approach, that's what we gotta figure out. I think we'll probably start with some. Disagree. A little. By the. Build up. Profit. We have not started.
No, but just kind of a conception.
Yeah.
Any. We're hoping that this can help the youth, but if you think decision makers need additional type of information. Or might be thinking about it differently, that's what we're trying to identify. And support. There's a lot of variables between frequency. Time period.
And you're not trying to go from like fluvial to actual flooding associated with that, you're just trying to put out the change in intensity that you're expecting to see, or you are gonna actually
We'll
have
have the
this.
fluvial depth grid from the
Okay.
fluvial model. Correct. So. There's been some discussion about what 6-inch threshold to say it's flooded maybe.
Yes.
So considering that threshold of the field, because we get certain.
Yeah.
Right? We would use that information along with like the coastal depth grid, everything else. To look at the maximum depth of flood. The challenge is fluvial
Yeah.
because we just have, well, what's the lowest common denominator that we have across the whole area. So that's a big, so, yeah. That'll be more simple, but I think on the other two, our plan is to get right about it. Say, okay, what's the most hazard here? What does it flood every time? A lot of my those two, which was first.
I feel like almost like the table of contents of your flood hazard, you start up top, it's the summary, and where do I need to dig into?
Yeah.
Because we're gonna have data across, because this is. As we get into the data products, they're gonna vary. Again, based on the available. With coastal, we have all multi-frequency and 4 projections. So we're gonna get that exposure. But fluvial. We've got a limitation to single frequency. So if you, based on what the location you're planning for, what you're exposed to, and kind of where you go from it, based on what you're exposed to. It's hard to give all this simply, I want.
Yeah, it's gonna be a challenge, but I wouldn't say I can think of anything offhand, that if we can convey all this, that.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. Yeah, no, not definitely not.
A lot of work to guide, like, you know, here to figure out what your problems are from a flood hazard.
I think that gets to the gist of what might be education for the decision makers.
Right.
We produced all of this.
Yeah.
Yes, we're gonna have a plan, but we need to let people know how to use
How
the
to use
information. In their business.
Choose your own adventure. Makers of the guy. I won't have to get it.
Any other thoughts or comments as far as combining the major sources of flooding and then reporting out those? I mean, project prioritization can become a lot of the impacts, but just kind of thinking about. We're not working with uniform consistent data. Mixing and matching. Convey that.
My only thoughts are, like when you think about the end user, so you have. And I don't know if it's easy, like a locality button, like. Put in your county and, plots show up and, zoning and all the stuff that they care about. On top of the data, or you have a you know, some of them have search your address for the citizens out there. So if it's user friendly for the end users, it would be like good. I don't know how you do that and put all that stuff in there.
So I think we'll have all the information in the back, right? We will have. It's what do we display, provide, and play. I think our thought process is. Every location has different interests. As far as what they're interested in, the priorities, they also have different exposure and kind of, so. Taking what they're interested in to craft a story based on the flood risk data, give them what's most. important. And if what they want isn't what we give them up front, well, we still have the data in the background. Hey, let us know what decision you're trying to make, and if you can't use the data as presented in this PDF plan or in what was it for, we still have the data. We still have the ability to provide technical support. Let's work with you, it's kind of moving forward, that's kind of the implementation. We're trying to meet as many stakeholders, our primary stakeholders, they have different viewpoints. Give them the information they need, at least get them thinking about this, and if they're really digging in and want what we're offering up front, we've got it available.
So Matt, I'm sorry, we had kind of a tiny little side discussion based on, you know, what Alex just shared. And I think, coming from myself being a GIS, person, I'm thinking about that locality and their ability to input that data to use with other data layers. And be able to actually make decisions based on that in a usable fashion. You know, and what I'm understanding is that, the way the data is planned, it's not necessarily gonna be in a format where it could be downloaded as in TAC or as a layer that could be compatible with the GIS system to be able to pull that data in instead of seeing it just on a viewer, which is not particularly always helpful to a locality to make decisions. You oftentimes need that data in some kind of GIS compatible format to be able to overlay with your locality data. So, or state agency, obviously, and the same. So, you know, having that background of managing statewide GIS data, like, I really think that it does need to have some thought into the viewer having some downloadable capabilities, whether it's through a grid system or through statewide, where they can clip the data to use their needs, to meet their needs. I think that some thought process to go into how someone will be able to consume that data into their decision-making process in the locality. And that's something that, you know, I do have some expertise on, so if there's a need for me to help or support that effort, you know, I can talk with Dewberry about that.
Yeah, no, that's great. The phase one data, it's out there on the AWS Open Data Portal. It is cumbersome to get to.
Yeah, it's
in
not.
Tile. It's not
User friendly, and it's not gonna be helpful to a locality who does not have the time to deal with that.
yes.
So if we're gonna do state data, we need to think about state data that is consumable in some way, form, or shape.
Yes.
So Alex makes an excellent point on that.
Any other thoughts or comments on our combined flooding and how we visualize and analytics? Make it online, Wheeler. Subcommittee recommendation. So we have been receiving your input, and some of these kind of gone into the recommendation side. Based on subcommittee title, I put those into the 3 buckets of research, data, and innovation. We could change these buckets. You know, we got. But here's some of the different kind of inputs that we've heard so far from the subcommittee and different feedback mechanisms on the research. Talk about the natural nature-based functionality and how wide does the wetland need to be to actually reduce wave energy or help slow down? And kind of more of the effectiveness of some of these natural nature features to know how much kind of risk we're able to buy into. And what are those? Those one of the like ideas we've heard on the data side. We talked about the land cover data. The state is still planning to expand the high resolution Chesapeake Conservancy data that uses the 2021 aerial imagery to go statewide. So that is in progress. But there is the subcommittee talks about the need for somebody to own the process and for that to be actually programmatic, built in, that there's a budget allocation, it's planned. Because the way we're doing it now, Chesapeake Conservancy, USGS, and EPA, they've already done the work, and we're saying, can we add on? And so can we get that into a programmatic fund included in the planning process so that it's all done kind of at once, comprehensive, instead of separate. Same goes with LiDAR data. We do and are collecting LiDAR data, but to be a little bit more proactive on the collection and strategic about where we need it and how it comes. That is also identified. On the innovation side, again, this gets away from some of our data, but just when we're installing different products, materials for coastal resilience, what are the different products that are available? Do we need new solutions to meet our needs? Or do we need products to be improved? These are just some of the initial ideas as far as where these recommendations can go. So we can have recommendations for what we need to do in future planning efforts, as well as other recommendations that can help us with implementation. And this is just a bit of a pointer for our next quarter's subcommittee. And then so that was from the subcommittee's input. We've got input from phase one as well. That identified where do we need technical process improvements. So understanding cultural resources and working with tribes we don't want to put out their cultural information on wide scale, but help understand and try to work with them. This was identified as a process improvement. Developing projects for impact hotspots, project improvement on the data side, standardizing some of the data, especially with the parcel data, getting more personalizations, expanding on our hazards beyond the major, what we call major sources, which we're covering in about some of the groundwater changes and how that's impacting people in the environment, compound flooding comes up again. On the impact side, asset data, knowing how sensitive either asset groups are or specific individual assets are to exposure to flooding or economic impacts. That's why we're resilience actions coming through the data for private benefit areas and on the innovation recommendations processes, which we're discussing in the funding. So that's some of the just input that we have from phase one. We've heard from you all. This is kind of the timeline for stuff. So today, just a quick overview of what we've discussed today, just to get you thinking about that in the three different buckets that we're focused on within this sub. Each subcommittee is working on recommendations for future planning. So within research, data, and innovation, those are the buckets. So I'd like to start working on Q2 on drafting some more recommendations on what we need to be doing to try to review and revise those in our Q3 meeting to get them finalized in Q4. We're going to have a contractor on board, talks about the resilient planning consulting contractors. They should be on board and ready to go for Q2. So they will be here to help facilitate this process as far as developing these recommendations and refining them to get to an end product for inclusion. Any questions on the overall schedule of developing recommendations for this? Any questions on the process? I'll throw those to our to be named contractors. I think it'll be good. Going through this process with most. Any other comments or questions? All right, any other discussion items that you'd like to talk about? I know we did receive, did you all receive the email from Troy at Sea Grant? There were two items that you wanted to talk about. Unfortunately, he was not able to attend today's meeting, but putting that on for potential agenda items for next. Any other discussion for today? All right, public comments.
No one has indicated they want to speak.
All right. So, action items. I need to solicit the data evaluation of these input on our fluvial data points or the low condition 75th or 90th percentile, providing that data and soliciting their input. I will work on that. I ask for you all to be thinking about recommendations and how what you think we need to be doing within research data innovation. It's not just limited to the data, but on the innovation side, where else do we need to be more forward thinking and able to really help provide solutions and build it. I think those were the key items. I don't know if there's anything else. Anything standing out? Next meeting, Q2 meeting. We can do it all virtual. Potentially in person again, or facilitated discussion, or that could be a challenge. So maybe it's an all virtual event that we have in breakout groups or something. The timing of that, let's see, our next ACT meeting will likely be in June. Right, so this will be end of April, early. And then beyond what Troy had recommended, and then subcommittee recommendations, are there any other items that you'd like for consideration?
Are you specifically looking for us to go ahead and add things into the bucket? Or wait on that? And then
So I want, thinking about those to bring to our Q2. Where then we'll be kind of working to hear people's needs, try to group them and refine and work through that recommendation. We had 3 meetings to get through the draft. It's gonna be. We may be soliciting input prior to the meeting. And discussing it, and bringing it to you all on this first. That's something we work with our contractors.
Could we potentially be prepared to extend the usual meeting time? In particular, if we're trying to flesh out the free research data and innovation buckets the next time, I could see that being pretty intensive work session.
Well, I think we have some flexibility. We're gonna have to work with our contractors. We will think about the time, try to probably get information ahead of time on your own time to stuff. Maybe the Q3 meeting might get extended based on Q2 meeting. Any other comments or questions? We got a motion to adjourn the meeting. All in favor?
All right.
Meeting adjourned.
Ooh.